Zippity-doo-dah, zippity-day. More Disney fun is on the way.
Enjoying the fun, it's here for everyone. In Wishmont or Cancun, La Paz or in Tulum.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is our final boarding call, and the doors will be closing soon.
WDW Radio, your information station.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to the WDW Radio Show, your passport to the world of Disney. I am your host, Lou Mangello, and this is show number 784. And together, as we have been since 2004, when I wrote my very first Walt Disney World trivia book, I've wanted to not only help you have the best possible Disney vacation experience when you go to the parks and on Disney Cruise Line, but I also want to bring you a little bit of that Disney magic wherever you are, here on the podcast, my weekly live video every Wednesday night, the blog, events, weekly newsletter, and more. Please join the community and the conversation and find everything at WDWRadio.com. So this week, we are setting the table for a delicious journey through time as we dive into the culinary magic, history, and evolution of Walt Disney World dining. Two of my favorite topics. From the early days of simple snacks and quick bites to today's world-class dining experiences, food has always been a part of the magic at the Disney parks. So grab your favorite snack, and together, let's explore the tasty transformations that have made dining at Walt Disney World an attraction unto itself. Then stay tuned for a Disney Trivia Question of the Week and updates about our not one, not two, but three group Adventures by Disney coming in 2025. And if you like what you hear, please share the show and tell a friend. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of the WDW Radio Show. From 25-cent hot dogs to meals with character and characters to Michelin star restaurants with chef's tables, food in Walt Disney World has become an important and I think comprehensive experience where dining now plays a crucial role in the overall Disney vacation experience. And for some of us, I think dining experiences are attractions, and instead of booking dining around rides, we do the opposite. But it always hasn't been like this. In fact, when Walt Disney World first opened, dining was, let's just say it was different. So this week, we're going to look at some culinary magic over the decades and the evolution of Walt Disney World dining experiences. And we're going to look at the history of dining at Walt Disney World from opening day to present, highlighting sort of the evolution of these experiences, maybe some extinct establishments, maybe a few of our favorite eats, and possibly what the foodie future may have in store. And joining me is friend and fellow Disney enthusiast and Disney history aficionado, and someone who I believe enjoys a good meal in the parks, Mickey-shaped or otherwise. You may know her from many, many past episodes of the show and her incredible work. You got to go check it out over on the WDW Radio blog. She is, of course, Kendall Foreman.
Hey, everybody. I'm glad to be back, and especially to talk about food, a topic that my family loves when we go to Walt Disney World. I do have to admit, though, I am a little bit intimidated because I have to come on here and talk about food, which I feel like I know my research and my history, but I have to follow up two world-renowned chefs. How did this happen?
We were talking before we started recording about last week's show and, you know, a very interesting, circuitous conversation with Chef Art Smith. So as we talk about the evolution of dining experiences, you know, the fact that he's there may or may not come into the discussion. And I think this is sort of the perfect convergence of two of my loves, you know, the history and Disney parks and dining as well. So I think this is going to be, and again, we don't really we don't share notes. We don't sort of have conversations about this as we do our research separately. So it'll be interesting to see how the conversation goes. But I think it's important, Kendall. We're going to talk specifically about the evolution of dining in Walt Disney World, but I think we need to figuratively set the table by going back a little bit, because as I started to think about opening day in Walt Disney World, I sort of looked to the other coast first. And I looked at Disneyland because I think it was important to sort of get a frame of reference of how Disneyland started and what did dining in that park look like in 1955. And it's funny because the first thing I thought about was opening day. I was like, all right, what did opening day in Disneyland look like from a culinary perspective? And the first thing I thought about was not sort of what was on the menu and on the table, but things that went wrong and how I think Disney's response to it evidenced sort of an overall thing. And what I'm talking about is when the park first opened, Disneyland first opened, and there were issues with plumbing, and Walt had a choice to make and decided to prioritize the installation and operation of toilets over drinking fountains. I think he was subtly just driving guests towards purchasing beverages in the parks. But, having those challenges and sort of ensuring food and beverage sales, I sort of, it's a little bit tongue and cheek. But, I think when the park first opened and it was the idea of a theme park, which was so different than an amusement park, the thought was, well, it's just hamburgers and hot dogs and French fries and things like that. And it really wasn't. There was an ad that I found from the Long Beach Independent Telegram that advertised Disneyland as a kingdom of good eating and promised unforgettable dining experiences akin to and next to some of the magical attractions. And it literally was called Good Eating Land at Disneyland. And I got very excited. I'm like, wait a minute, did my history not tell me that there was literally a land called Good Eating Land at Disneyland? It was metaphorical. But, if you sort of look back at Disneyland from a 30,000 foot view, there is this evolution of iconic treats and the social aspect of dining, right? So you start thinking about the introduction of the novelty treats like popcorn and cotton candy, which continues to be beloved, right? And I think it's almost more nostalgic than anything else. Introduction of things like the Dole Whip, but even the social aspect of it. And from a corporate perspective, the sponsorship aspect of it, right? So when you think about it, when the park opened, yes, there was, quick items like hot dogs for people who were on the go. And then some of the sit down locations that were sponsored, like Swift's Red Wagon and the Chicken of the Sea pirate ship. And this idea of themed dining and the again, sort of that convergence of this idea of theming and storytelling with bringing in corporate sponsors, which was so part of the core necessity of opening Disneyland in the first place.
Yeah, actually, throughout researching this topic, I found a 1977 issue of the Eyes and Ears of Walt Disney World, and they talked about the difference between when Disneyland opened versus Walt Disney World. And because they were so focused on creating that theme park environment, they left all of the dining to concessionaires, like what you're saying. Not only were those sponsors there as sponsors, but they were there providing the food. And so Disney controlled the operation of it and who was there, who got those sponsorships, but they actually weren't running the food. And that's such a drastic difference from, I think they very quickly realized that there can be a show aspect to food. And you see that change then in the 60s. And by the time Walt Disney World opens in 71, now they're looking at how do we run this? How do we incorporate this into the overall park experience and create a show aspect with every part of the guest experience?
And it was critical, right? So when you mentioned it, the first thing I thought about was the Blue Bayou, right? Which opened in 66 in coinciding with the opening of Pirates of the Caribbean, which introduced, I think, more so than anything else, this idea of a truly themed dining experience where you can enjoy meals while also watching the boats go by. But Walt was so detail focused and detail oriented, and it had to be a good show, that even though the Blue Bayou was ready when New Orleans Square was dedicated in 66, Pirates wasn't. So Walt delays, right? He leaves money on the table, delays the opening of Blue Bayou, saying, look, it's bad show to be sitting there looking out into the bayou and there's no pirate boats floating by. So it wasn't just about the dining. It was about the experience aspect of it. And, you know, even sort of continuing further on, the concept of Club 33, right? This exclusive club, not just opening in terms of having an elevated, you know, roped off dining experience, but it's fine dining, right? Fine dining in the parks on a very, very different scale. Again, the entire area, though, the storytelling is not just in what you see, but what you eat, and the cuisine had to be authentic there too, whether it was in New Orleans Square or the Tahitian Terrace in Adventureland, sort of along the banks of the Jungle Cruise River. You know, the Banjo Barbecue. Again, a lot of these things had corporate sponsors as well. Think about Dole Whips coming in the 70s too, and sort of the importance of the corporate thing there. But as Disneyland continuing to evolve, this elevation of the dining experience, whether it is in the themed grab and go treats that you were getting along the way, like something like a Dole Whip, or some of the more elaborate sit down experience that you can have in the park. And I think as time goes on, right, from the 60s into the 70s and the 80s, the way park goers were looking forward to it and almost their expectations for what a dining experience should be, were evolving as well.
Yeah, definitely. There was another quote in there. It said, you know, they were focusing on the show aspect of food rather than, and I thought this was very interesting, rather than on high profitability. And I think once if you want, do you want to go ahead and move on to Disney World, or did you have any more to say about Disneyland?
I mean, we could almost do a show completely about Disney, because, you know, I think you and I are the same way. We start doing research, and next thing you know, I had like 11 books on my desk, and I start going down the very deep rabbit hole, because I think it was important to sort of, again, lay the foundation of the way Disneyland started to evolve, and things that we sort of take for granted now were really sort of keystone moments along the way from a culinary perspective, in terms of introducing, you know, we just sort of assume like churros and Mickey bars have just like always been there, and they weren't, but they have become these sort of classic, beloved, nostalgic foods that don't just represent the way we sort of snack through the parks, but the way we come to look for a variety of culinary offerings there as well.
Well, and also the kind of the back of house aspect that had to be established there at Disneyland and then carried forward into Walt Disney World, to where you get to a point where they have a central food facility and a food distribution center, and all of that kind of came about at the same time. And it was interesting. I recently was looking through some photos I had of windows on Main Street, and I saw a name, and it said, what was it? Jim Armstrong Vegetable Buyer. And it was on the window that says Chinese restaurant. And I thought, well, that has to have something to do with food. And I had never heard the name Jim Armstrong before. But he was part of a core group that was set up toward, you know, not long after the opening of Walt Disney World, that was this food administration. It was is Jim Armstrong and Ed Moriarty and Bob Matheson. Bob Matheson also has a window on Main Street. But that were in charge of this, you know, all of these future projects as far as food, and how do we, you know, consistently provide the show value and consistently provide the same type of food, and how do we do this on mass scale, and the number of employees it takes to do this. And, you know, you go from having those concessionaires at Disneyland to, you know, that type of, you know, environment where you're having to provide all of this in-house.
So I think if we look at Disneyland sort of as a whole, right, in terms of how it sort of set it up for Walt Disney World, I think there's a couple of things that carry forward. One, the idea that from day one, Walt Disney was an early adopter and an early innovator. So Disneyland from opening day featured unique and themed dining options, which I think set a new standard for amusement, quote unquote, amusement park food. You've got these sponsored eateries that provided not just a themed experience, but I think if you look at the menus too, they provided comfort foods. They were sort of iconic foods that people were comfortable and familiar with to make them more approachable and accessible to guests. Then they start introducing this idea of themed dining experiences, many of which complement and literally and figuratively sit next to specific attractions, which enhance the overall immersive experience in the park. As they do these things, unbeknownst to them at the time, they're leaning into not just innovation and nostalgia and creating foods that are going to be iconic, like Dole Whips and churros, which I think start to create and enhance, and as time goes on, reinforce the emotional connection that we have to the parks. And even, I started to think about this too, Kendall. Early sort of food items almost started to integrate with merchandise as well, right? Some of the food items like Mickey Waffles and Dole Whips have sort of transcended just being a quick walk around snack to the evolution of we're buying merchandise with food items on them or shaped like food items. And I think, again, it starts to create this almost culture of a food-centric social experience in the parks, which as time goes on, I think becomes a more vital part of the visitor experience. Long segue across to the other side of the country to Walt Disney World and the opening of Magic Kingdom in 1971. So as you start to do your research, as you start to sort of frame your look at the evolution from October 1st, 1971, where did you sort of start your historical journey with Magic Kingdom?
I kind of looked at two things. I wanted to make sure that I kind of got a read on what the temperature was in the country as a whole, as what was happening with American cuisine during this same time period as what happened at Walt Disney World. And something I found very interesting was that for Americans in the 1950s, for most of America, food was really about sustenance. Mm-hmm. It wasn't as integral to our culture as food is to a lot of other cultures. And also with that, we didn't have kind of the expanse of international experience of food yet. I mean, certainly not like what we have today. And so I think that even played a role into the 70s. I think in the history of, U.S. cuisine, you start to find that in the 1970s is when you start to get little pockets of, Italian food and vegetarian menus and Japanese steakhouses. And some of these are starting to make their foray into kind of more middle America. And so I think you see little pieces of that in the 70s at Walt Disney World. And the other big influence is just what was a factor for Disney World as a whole, which is this idea of the vacation kingdom of the world. Mm. And that even more so than the food that was being given was the environment in which it was being provided. There were so many kind of these adult type experiences or, dinner theater, dinner show type experiences, whether that was the Top of the World Club or the Hoop-Dee-Doo Review or, entertainment that's happening at Tomorrowland Terrace. Like all of this food is being provided as a means for people who are also enjoying that entertainment. And in a lot of cases, the food that you see was kind of like the elevated food that mom would serve, at a holiday meal or on a weekend, like what you mentioned before, kind of that comfort idea of something you recognize and maybe a little twist that you weren't quite used to. So not quite as much authenticity yet. Like if you look at, for example, the South Seas buffet at the Polynesian Resort, they had round of beef and roast pork and vegetables and a salad bar, things that people would recognize, but in an environment that was more themed.
Yeah, it's funny because if you look at some of the locations and some of the menus, you're right. Yes, obviously, there was one park and it had relatively compared to today, limited dining options really that leaned into American staples, right? Food that we were familiar with. So whether you're at Liberty Tree Tavern, you have sort of this quote unquote traditional American fare in a colonial setting. And even if you go to Pinocchio Village House, you've got pizza and burgers, things that people are very familiar with. For me, when I first started to think about Magic Kingdom, I was like, all right, what are some of the differences and improvements and lessons that were learned from Disneyland that were implemented in Walt Disney World? So I almost sort of focused less on, at the beginning, the individual food items than sort of the overall system. Because even as a kid, Kendall, I would always get in the car on the way home and I would just tell my parents, like, I just can't believe that this is like a real working city that just operates 24/7, 365 in this incredibly seamless way that we don't experience anywhere else. And one of the things that Magic Kingdom Walt Disney World had to deal with that was going to be different than Disneyland was the blessing and the curse of size, right? You're now having to cater to larger crowds. There's an increased volume of food production, right? So they start to look to producing these things off-site, and there's third-party companies to not just meet the demand, but to ensure consistency and quality. So there's a streamlining from a logistics point of view of the operation to ensure guest satisfaction at a level where the volume was going to be much greater than they were getting in Disneyland. And I think Cosmic Rays in Tomorrowland is sort of a great example of that. And I've seen this stat over the years, and I've tried to verify it as best as I can, and I keep sort of getting the same result. Do you know what do you think is the busiest restaurant in Magic Kingdom? You probably know this because you're a researcher too, but what do you think is the busiest restaurant in Magic Kingdom?
I'm sure that I've read this, but I would guess that it's Cosmic Rays, which was Tomorrowland Terrace back in the 70s.
Right.
Just because it has all those bays and the space for that many people.
Right. So they were preparing. They knew ahead of time. It's the busiest restaurant. Again, I am quoting from a number. It's supposedly the busiest restaurant like in the country, and one of the busiest in the world. Like the stats I was reading, like they serve like 52 million guests every single year. So again, we're talking about the efficacy in delivering high quality foods, and that's where things like the utilidors come into play. I started to think about like, well, then how do you staff it, right? They eventually start thinking about bringing in college kids and the Disney college program, and the birth of character dining, right? The birth of character dining in Walt Disney World, which has become sort of central for a lot of people to the Magic Kingdom dining offerings, because those themed environments are not just about what you see, but being able to interact with the characters as well. Although I still question why it was King Stephen's Banquet Hall instead of Cinderella's Royal Table, since it was from a completely different story. Like, did nobody pick up on that right away? Like, this is Cinderella Castle, but it's King Stephen's Banquet Hall. These are the things that keep me up late at night.
Yeah, I mean, to go along with the idea of character dining too, I think that, that's another very important thing that happens in the 70s, which, I find fascinating, this idea of using food and characters together to help save what was the Buena Vista Village at that point in time, because people weren't making that association. Like there was issues with guests not realizing that was actually a part of Disney. And so they decided first to have breakfast with Santa for Christmas in 1977, and it was so popular and got so many people to come there to Buena Vista Village when it was kind of, a dead zone a lot of times, that then they're like, well, how can we keep this up? And so they decided to have breakfast with Snow White on the Empress Lily, and the birth of character dining happens, which is huge, clear till today, and obviously, kind of has ebbed and flowed over some of these different decades. We might get to that later, but definitely an important moment there in that first decade of the parks.
Yeah. Again, we could almost do an entire episode just about the evolution of character dining that starts in the 70s. And again, I sort of had conflicting information in terms of what was sort of technically the first character dining experience, because I know that they did a breakfast buffet in the Contemporary at Coconino Cove, which had character dining. But by the 80s, you have multiple locations, not just in the Disney Village Marketplace and the Village Restaurant, which later became Chef Mickey's, which later eventually moved over to the Contemporary. But now it has sort of grown and evolved. And I think for a lot of guests, especially to have kids, like, as much as coming to Disney World is a rite of passage, like the character dining is a rite of passage as well. And whether we have kids or we're kids at heart, we have those places that we love to go and go back to. So there's been this evolution from occasionally themed meals here and there to something that is an integral part of a dining experience. And if you don't believe me, try and get reservations at Cinderella's Royal Table or some of these other very, very popular. I mean, they almost had to expand simply to meet the demand of guests who were unable and still to this day sometimes are not able to get reservations where they want with the characters that they want, which is why it has become a breakfast, lunch, and dinner multi-location experience every single day.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting to see, too, how sometimes it seems as if the characters are used to kind of launch a restaurant, to, bring people in and get them to experience the food there. And then in other cases, it's used as just another tier of elevation, like you mentioned, at King Stephen's Banquet Hall, Cinderella's Royal Table versus, somewhere like when it was Pepiete Bay Veranda at the Polynesian Resort, where there was probably a lot of people visiting Walt Disney World that didn't have a clue that restaurant was even there. But now they know that's where they can go meet Minnie. And then they find out how great the food is.
Yeah, when I was doing my research, the internet is great, but I'm still relatively old school. And I have like my super old Birnbaum books, stacked up on my shelf. And it's what I love going back to because I love to get these year by year snapshots in time. And for something like this, they're invaluable because you really can start to see, if you look at them collectively, I sort of grabbed like 5, through the decades, you can see how not just the number of locations, for example, in Magic Kingdom has expanded, the type of food that they're serving has expanded, but they started to, I think, really lean into more this idea of wanting dining not just to be a place, like you said, to get sustenance, but to overall enhance the theme park experience. That's why, I said half jokingly, food is just something you do in between attractions. It starts to be the thing that you are focused on almost first because they are almost attractions in and of themselves.
Yeah, and I think the biggest driver of that fact was in the early 1980s with the development of Epcot. And I feel like the 80s at Walt Disney World when it comes to dining is really defined by this strive for authenticity. And now that authenticity might be different than what we have today, just because the world is smaller than what it was then. But considering where the country was as a whole in the early 1980s, to have people like Chef Paul Bocuse come and direct restaurants in France, to have your executive chef of Epcot Center, Walter Meyer, who was inducted into the Honorable Order of the Golden Toque, 100 lifetime chefs. There's only 100 of them. They get to stay in it for their entire lives. And this is the man that's directing the dining at the opening of Epcot. To have the original Alfredo di Roma restaurant. There's only 3 of them in the world. One in Italy where, Alfredo was invented. Places like teppanyaki dining, Mitsukoshi, run by people from Japan. And even I loved a little tidbit I found about the holidays at Epcot in the early 80s. I would have never expected this at this point in time, but they listed some of the things that were offered for Christmas, some of the Christmas meals. So at Beer Garden, they actually had goose roasted on a spit. At Chefs de France, they also had roast goose with salmon souffle.
Hey kids, look, it's roasted goofy.
That wouldn't go over well. At Alfredo's, they had corn-fed capon. At San Angel, they had turkey basted in achiote. Like, very authentic things that, quite honestly, you would probably not even see on a menu today. And so I think that is what really creates that push that, to offer Americans something that they maybe weren't getting in their hometown, to come here and see what these places are actually like.
Yeah, Epcot was a game changer in a number of different respects, right? Not just being completely different than Magic Kingdom and Disneyland, but from a culinary perspective, where we'll sort of focus primarily on World Showcase. It offers very authentic national cuisines, which doesn't just diversify the culinary options that are available, but also as part of the overall mission of Epcot, there's a little bit of edutainment in your dining because it helps to educate guests about different cultures through food. And I think the advent of Epcot in 82 brought a very sort of revolutionary approach to dining for Disney, that by offering items that most guests probably, for the most part, had never seen or heard of before, it helps to sort of not just broaden the guest palate, which I think overall the country is starting to do as a whole, but this cultural appreciation and this gradual realization and awakening that food can and should be part of the overall themed dining experience, which is, again, not just sort of limited to World Showcase, but if you think about some of the themed dining options in Future World as well, they're not necessarily character-based. They're not story-based. Again, remember, Epcot in 1982 had no characters until Michael Eisner walked in. It's like, where the heck is Mickey Mouse? But look at places, Coral Reef, right? You've got this literal direct look at marine life while dining. Again, pick your own palate. Garden Grill, Le Cellier, Saint Anel, Chefs de France, a lot of the other locations too. It offers different sort of tiers in terms of whether it's something quick, grab and go, or fine dining in a very sort of robust and authentic French menu.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you bring up Coral Reef as well. I think a lot of times that restaurant gets forgotten, but just the idea of that, I don't know if there was another restaurant in the country that was allowing people to sit next to an aquarium and have their dinner. The idea of these very authentic foods being paired in the environments that they were in, I feel like was very revolutionary at that time.
And then, it continues on with the, we sort of take them for granted now, Kendall, but, there were not always festivals in Epcot, certainly not almost year round. I'm waiting for the summer festival to be announced because I think that it's coming. But the launch of the festivals in Epcot in the 90s now sort of shifts the focus a little bit, I think, because now, again, you're not sort of adding on these locations that you want to try, maybe, have some fun going to different locations. But I think it turns Epcot into a culinary destination, as now you have not just reasons to go, but you have reasons to go back with Flower and Garden in 94, Food and Wine in 96, Festival of the Holidays and Festival of the Arts, which is very new, right? That didn't come around until 2017. But I think there's this realization that, again, we're not just bringing in characters into the parks, but we're bringing in new reasons for guests to visit and be able to sort of slowly and in literal and figurative small bites introduce guests to even a wider spectrum of items from around the world.
Yeah, I think it's very cool that Food and Wine, I mean, first off, I think it's interesting that it was like the infant baby version of Food and Wine over at the Walt Disney World Village, where they had, the wine festival in 81 until it moved over to Epcot when they started offering the food. But I love that the second year of that festival, that one of the guests of honor that they had there was Julia Child. And the fact that here's this woman who was responsible for bringing French, between her and James Beard and a couple others, responsible for bringing French cuisine to America. And the idea that here she is in a theme park, and that just the world that was open to people through this. I mean, just from my own personal experience, growing up in a very rural area where the height of international cuisine was Olive Garden. And I mean, I loved Olive Garden as a kid, and I felt like I was fairly cultured as a child. Like, my parents really strove to introduce new foods to my sister and I. Like, I was the only kid who had ever had hummus at my school. And like, we had so many new food experiences at Walt Disney World in the 90s. Like, things that we could not get at home. I couldn't get anywhere near a French pastry in my town. Like, you know, foods that I grew up then looking forward to going back to Walt Disney World in order to have these things again that I couldn't have where I was from. You know, or I would have to drive 4 or 5 hours away from where I was from to find another one of. And so I think that's very cool, that marriage of, you know, here's this kind of icon of foodie culture, of, you know, culinary culture, who comes there for the Food and Wine Festival, and, you know, just this visibility of dining and culture and everything that happened there at Epcot in the 90s.
And you're right, it almost happened by accident. Like, the idea of bringing that festival over from the Walt Disney World Village was, one, it was really wine focused, and it was like, oh, we can show off all of our topiaries here in Epcot, and next thing you know, it blossoms. And there's stories about, you know, some of the executives at Disney going to food and wine festivals elsewhere in Orlando, and sort of the light bulb going off, like, wait a minute, we can do this here too. And now look how, you know, the festivals are not just sort of part of the Epcot experience. I mean, they really are, they've become reasons that people go and book their trips during certain times of year, because I think we all have our favorite festivals and things that we want to do and things we want to see. And it's enhanced that park to another level without having the expense almost of, you don't need to build a new pavilion. You don't need to add a new attraction. You don't need to sort of create this huge infrastructure. But now we have, from a purely, you know, business standpoint, this incredible cash cow multiple times a year, that is relatively easy to sort of, and I know it's not easy, like I understand, but it's sort of rinse and repeat for bringing these festivals to life every year.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of interesting, just making the leap forward of how each of these festivals started out with their kind of their own themes, and now they all kind of have sneakily become about food. You know, I mean, I remember I was there the year that they first had food at the Flower and Garden Festival. And I remember everybody talking about Frushi that year. And, you know, how each one of these, you know, we love food, and Disney realized, you know, clear back to what we talked about in Disneyland. It brings people in. It draws people in. It makes you want to come back. You get those FOMO feelings of all the things you want to try. And so, yeah, the evolution of the festivals is very interesting in the food history of Walt Disney World.
And I think, too, Kendall, like, I think there's also this realization from Disney's point of view that, wait a minute, we can create these attractive, themed, like, higher end culinary experiences that don't necessarily have to be a table service restaurant that has relatively low turnover and things like that. So if you look at the opening of the Disney MGM Studios in 1989, again, there's this introduction of a new set of themed dining experiences around Hollywood and the movie. And yes, you've got finer dining like Hollywood Brown and Derby, but if you look at, especially in opening year and even as it's continued to evolve, there is almost a lot more attention being focused on quick service options than their, you know, sort of quick sort of meals on the go rather than longer sit down experiences. Yes, you've got sci-fi dine-in and a couple of the other ones, but even with the opening of things like Toy Story Land and Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, new culinary experiences that emphasize quick service and themed dining, which I think is very much in alignment with sort of the overall nature of that park, right? And I think it's still sort of continuing to balance between quick snacks and more elaborate meals. There's now, you know, the Rodeo Roundup barbecue and things like that. But as the parks evolve and elevate, I think, and as we as guests and far more international visitors now coming over to Walt Disney World, they're catering to diverse guest preferences that with an ever evolving sort of dining landscape through the parks, even as things like Galaxy's Edge gets opened up. There's a focus on quick grab and go, get your food and move on experiences.
Yeah, I mean, you to kind of address what you said there about Hollywood Studios, I think MGM Studios in '89, I think the importance of Michael Eisner and the Disney decade and what happened with dining at that point in time, like, that cannot be understated. Like, I don't know, behind the scenes how much truth there is to, like, the crazy ideas of Michael Eisner and some of the, crazy stuff that happened. But I love the phrase that they used on Behind the Attraction on the Eats episode. They used the term thematic feeding, and which sounds so funny. It makes us all sound like animals. But that I feel like that thematic feeding, I mean, yes, that goes all the way back to Blue Bayou, like we mentioned, but I feel like that really takes off in the 1990s. I mean, and as you say, from sit-down dining all the way down to quick service and kiosks. I mean, even kiosks like Gertie's and Min and Bill's at Hollywood Studios, and, up to, as you say, 50s Primetime Cafe, the Sci-Fi Dine-In, or, with the opening of Animal Kingdom, places like, Restaurantosaurus or Rainforest Cafe, and then even into the resorts, somewhere like Ohana, where you have the world's largest fire pit. That just feels like something that would happen at Disney in the 90s. Like, we're going to build a restaurant with the world's largest fire pit just to give you the best experience of a Hawaiian barbecue. Just some of those crazy ideas that pushed the dining experience forward in the 90s, and that, as you say, laid the groundwork for places that we've gotten in the new millennium, like Galaxy's Edge, like Satuli Canteen, Woody's Lunchbox, places that just are very well themed, very focused, right. Not just to go up to the counter and grab your thing and there's a cool sign above it.
Right. And Epcot, to a certain degree, is almost doing the opposite. They're like, wait a minute, we sort of are becoming the food-focused destination. Think about places like Le Cellier. I think a lot of people forget it was a cafeteria-style restaurant when it first opened. Everyone's like, no, it's not. It's cheddar cheese soup and, like, steaks. I'm like, no, this was a cafeteria-style restaurant, eventually evolving into a very high demand, higher end steakhouse, still focusing obviously on authentic Canadian cuisine and culture. But I think it sort of is indicative of the shift of like Disney MGM Studios. It's quick on the go, like the hustle and bustle of Hollywood. Epcot, yes, we've got festivals, we've got, quick service dining options, but we want to make sure that we have elevated sit down table service experiences in almost all of the pavilions very early on.
Yeah, definitely. I think, whether it's the 80s or 90s there at Epcot, it's that strive for authenticity. It's that adult type feel that's always been present there. Not that it's not approachable for kids. It's still, like I mentioned, these are great opportunities to introduce your kids to these foods. And I love that that's something that was present in Epcot from the beginning. But yeah, they go very adult and very authentic, and some of the other parks go more this other direction of very thematic and everything on point with regards to whatever that location is.
Well, and that's sort of a nice, easy transition to places like Disney's Animal Kingdom. Since it's opened in 98, I think it's intended very deliberately to offer culinary experiences that are as diverse and as educational as the attractions and exhibits. Again, very, very focused heavily on emphasizing authenticity. And I think more importantly too, Kendall, is everywhere you go in Disney's Animal Kingdom, it really is about storytelling, whether it's in the sit-down restaurants, whether it's in the food stalls. You can tell everything has been heavily researched. It's the thematic integration between everything you see here, all five senses, 360 degrees at that park, and the storytelling that almost happens through the food there, right? And almost allowing, by having things, and this is obviously, later on, but when you have areas and cuisines that are foreign to a lot of domestic guests. And then when you introduce something like Pandora the World and Avatar in 2017, now you can go like cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, right? Because you can sort of add this very exotic new layer to the culinary offerings because you've got these, alien planet sort of inspired visuals and flavors that really sort of enhance the thematic storytelling, not just in the walls and the ground, but in the food as well.
Yeah, this is interesting sitting here listening to you, because as I'm listening to you talk and what we've talked about in the other parks,
you're getting hungrier. I'm with you. I'm famished.
Yeah, obviously. But no, I'm kind of recognizing how each of these parks really did build on each other. Magic Kingdom offers that approachable, recognizable food, and then Epcot brings you the authenticity, and then Hollywood Studios MGM brings the thematics, and then Animal Kingdom brings it all together. Mm-hmm. It's Harambe Market is the perfect example of authenticity and thematic feeding, if to use their phrase. It marries those perfectly. You go, and are they toned down versions of what you would get in those actual nations? Absolutely. But again, you're using those authentic flavors, that authentic environment, and it's so heavily themed to where it is, you feel like you've stepped into it.
And I think you're right. And I think sort of leaning into that, when you think about things like Tiffin's and Nomad Lounge, these elevated experiences, isn't it? That you go to eat at Tiffin's, and if you don't believe me, Kendall, I'll take you to prove my point. You forget that you're in a theme park, right? It is a much more elevated experience. Even when you're sitting, one of my favorite places is sitting outside at Nomad Lounge, and you can sort of hear the sounds of Pandora in the distance, and you've got the water, and it's wonderful, but it is a little bit more of an elevated experience. And I think this is part of, I think the 90s sort of represents this culinary renaissance that starts to happen at Disney, in the parks and in the resorts as well, where there's this heavy emphasis on theming and storytelling and these dining experiences that match their location within the parks and resorts. You also have this elevated experience. You talked about Paul Bocuse and something. All of a sudden, you have this integration of celebrity chefs, which sort of helps to build on and enhance the Disney's already sort of very high culinary reputation, right? And now look at, you've got, these very fine dining and signature restaurants and places like Victoria and Albert's that open up and get Michelin stars. And so, again, that's what I talked about, this evolution of the 25-cent hot dogs to Michelin star restaurants that, are if you thought, trying to meet Anna and Elsa was a hot ticket a few years ago, try and get a reservation at Victoria and Albert's, because they are this continuing sort of growth and expansion of the culinary spectrum. Again, not just in the Disney parks proper, but sort of reflecting what we as a culture and society are looking for in our experiences as well.
Yeah, I distinctly remember in I think it was late 90s, we went to eat at that point in time, the Disney Village Marketplace, and there was Wolfgang Puck Express. And again, this was the first place I ever had a wood-fired Neapolitan-style pizza. And I was ruined for pizza for the rest of my life, at home. And all. We always would talk about, remember that amazing pizza we had? And why can't we get pizza like that here? And of course, that was pizza made in Florida. So, but still,
where the water's awful.
Wood-fired pizza was on a whole different tier from regular pizza in our world. But, Wolfgang Puck was there with a restaurant in Disney Village Marketplace. And I think, another big factor with those celebrity chefs was there, again, in the Disney decade, that whole Crescent Lake area. And the fact that was built, you get the Swan and Dolphin, you get the Yacht Club, you get the Boardwalk, and that opens the door to things, later down the road, like Todd English's Blue Zoo and Cat Cora with Cuisina, which is not there today, but that was one of those initial celebrity partnerships, those world-renowned chefs that, I joked with my husband about this. I said, the 2010s was like the James Beard invasion because you have, literally you have Morimoto Asia, and you have Art Smith, and you have Rick Bayless at Frontiera Cocina, you have Jaleo with Jose Andres. The list goes on and on of, and how many other places in the world, unless you're going to, New York City or something, how many other places are you going to find that concentration of, award-winning chefs in one place?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think, you're talking about sort of the 2000s. I think the new millennium, I want to sort of phrase this the right way, because it's not a shift in focus, but I think there are some new focuses that Disney starts to integrate. So one, there is this focus on not just having higher end, elevated, renowned celebrity, quote unquote, celebrity chefs coming in, but how do we sort of make sure we accommodate? And I don't just mean sort of dining accommodations, and we've talked about this in the past, that Disney has always been and continues to be for many folks that have, whether themselves or family members that have special dietary requirements or requests, being the most accommodating places that they can go. But Disney, I think, has always been sort of forward looking and progressive. So I think this new millennium brings in this focus on fresh and seasonal and locally sourced ingredients and a much broader range of dietary options, right? Starting to think more about a health conscious and inclusive approach to menu offerings. And I think we see that, and sort of to piggyback on what you said, you talk about a lot of these celebrity chefs, the transformation of downtown Disney to Disney Springs, that sort of represents this very significant, I think, expansion in diversifying the options that are available there. It reflects a lot of the current culinary trends and I think more importantly, guest preferences, which has now made Disney Springs sort of like the center of the map for, culinary activity. Like if you want not just a broad range of places, but, such a wide variety of options in flavors and types of experiences as well, right? Like we just ate at Eat by Chef Manit Chauhan. It is a counter service location that serves, modernized Indian street food. That's fantastic. It's an amazing experience, sort of tucked away in the corner. But if you also want something that is higher end, more elevated, you can get that as well. And I love having that broad range of choices, like in a single place that does not necessarily require a theme park ticket as well.
I definitely agree about the kind of the evolution of that accessibility of different foods in Walt Disney World. Another interesting tidbit I found while reading this was there was an advertisement in one of the 1970s Disney magazines about the lunching pad. And it said how they were focusing on natural offerings, and that they highlighted their creamy pineapple coconut juice, their natural tuna fish sandwich on alfalfa sprouts that were sprouted in the kitchen that day, cream cheese on honey date nut bread. And there was a quote in there that said, as we go into the future, more and more people are interested in the food we eat and how it is grown and made. And I found that fascinating that was a factor from, practically day one. And I love how you can see that grow until you get to the point of what you're saying, where it's no longer, for decades, people felt safe coming to Disney World because they knew my child with peanut allergies can eat here. Right. I can trust them. My family member with, a gluten intolerance, celiac disease, whatever it is. And now it's not even just that. We're catering to that. Mm-hmm. It's not just we're going to take that thing out of the food. It's we're going to craft, high-end meals around this, whether that's vegetarian or dairy-free or whatever it is, you're not getting a less than or a subpar experience. You're getting a full experience. Right.
You're right. Those options are not there for the sake of saying, oh, look, we have a vegetarian and vegan item on. They're there because they're actually really well. And you're right. They are crafted specifically. And I have found, as somebody who's not vegan or vegetarian, that sometimes I will lean into those options because I like the flavors of them. So some of the Impossible stuff that they've done over the years, has been incredible. And while you're right, there's always been the option, right? Whether you go to a table service or counter service, if you say, hey, my son has this, they will stop what they're doing and they will bring out a chef. And whether it's a counter service location or not, they will make sure that they accommodate. But it no longer is, well, I don't want to say anything. I feel like they're on the menu, right? A lot of those items are on the menu. And again, it's evolving with changing times and not just desires, but needs that we find that we have as we become more educated about, what our bodies need and what sometimes, can't be accepted or tolerated. So there has been this, this evolution. Look, you could even sort of look at the resorts and look at sort of how the resorts too have started to become, well, this is just the place we're staying, so we'll just run downstairs and eat in the food court. The resorts themselves have evolved to become destinations as well, right? We're trying to get into these locations at resorts we're not staying at. There's no other reason to visit but for the fact that the chicken sugo rigatoni at Topolino's is some of the best pasta I've ever had in my life.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too when you start hearing about things, especially in the last decade, about the food lab and the amount of time and care that goes into these menus that are crafted. Narcoossee's was closed for an extended period of time, and I really enjoyed the review that you did recently there. But it was closed for an extended period of time, and I find it interesting because they said they took 18 months to craft that menu. Mm-hmm. And we've learned this just, again, some of the accessibility and visibility of some of these people that are working within the company that has happened over the last 5 to 10 years, where we learned some of these foods take 4 years in development. It took them 4 years to come up with the transparent fruit that they served on the Star Cruiser. They spent 4 years developing blue milk. The care that goes into this and the craftsmanship of it is quite incredible. And, that's what's happening at not just the parks, but each of these resorts. They took the similar amount of time, 18 months on Ale and Compass when they came up with that new menu. And I don't even know how many restaurants there are across all of the entire property that this is happening at.
I mean, literally hundreds of dining locations throughout the parks, whether you take everything from a quick service stand to some of the table service. And as I sort of look back, with hindsight from a much broader and wider view, the things that they did at the beginning, they are continuing to do from Disneyland to Magic Kingdom's opening day. Again, scaling, efficiency, being able to handle way more bigger crowds now than there were back in the 70s, and ensuring that food has not sort of become an afterthought. It's never been an afterthought, but it's always been part of the seamless experience. There is an educational aspect to it. There is a cultural and culinary education. I think food has become sort of an educational and an immersive tool that introduces guests to a variety of different parks and of flavors and traditions in a single park visit. Right, in one day you can learn a lot, you can experience a lot. The thematic dining, and I think it's more than just sort of theming a location, but we use the word immersive a lot. And I think over the years we've seen just how far and wide and deep that level of immersion really is in terms of it being very deeply integrated with the thematic element of each area. And look, whether it's looking at pirate ships from the Blue Bayou or some of the futuristic looking offerings in Galaxy's Edge or Pandora, I think food is really continuing to be used as a way to complement and enhance the storytelling experience of the attractions. I mean, even look at things like, I was trying to think of in Magic Kingdom, like Be Our Guest. Look at how Magic Kingdom has evolved into what Be Our Guest now, with not just the divided thematic rooms, but, and they all evoke different sort of scenes and feelings from the film, but there's that integrated storytelling with the culinary offerings that are available there. I think that we sort of talked about.
Something else that happened with Be Our Guest too was that was kind of the first integration of technology in quick service. Initially when that opened and it was quick service all day long, and you had those kiosks and you had the rows that you got, and your food would magically come to your table. And, that kind of leads into things like mobile ordering and how that has changed the way that we consume the foods that we have in the parks and our overall experience. And, the efficiency also, I think, is a big part of that evolution of dining.
Which is that, look, not to get on a tangent, but there were some great things that came out of the shutdown of the parks. And I think mobile ordering and the efficiency, the efficacy of not having to spend a lot of time, quote unquote, downtime, waiting online, waiting for food. All of a sudden it becomes, you're able to sort of get the foods that you want on a schedule that you are not sort of adhering to the schedule of the restaurant. It's able to sort of adhere to you and when you want it and how quickly you can get it. Like, I think it's brilliant the way they were able to do that. And there is this continuing innovation and adaptation in the adaptations of the culinary offerings, not just with technology, but I think with changing guest expectations, whether it's from snack carts to more elaborate themed, elevated offerings as well. And it starts to make me think, Kendall, about, what's next? What are some of the future directions of dining at Walt Disney World? I think we're seeing it already with a very clear, very obvious focuses on sustainability and responsibility and environmentally responsible practices in the culinary operations. You talked about some of the technological enhancements and mobile ordering. How is AI going to start to become involved in personalizing some of our dining recommendations as the app gets better? It sees our history and the way that we've dined and where we've been and what we've enjoyed, and being able to sort of provide recommendations and technology starting to play a significant role in the evolution of the dining experience in the Disney parks. And, our palates are continuing to expand. Again, look back to Disneyland and even Walt Disney World's opening day, starting to push the boundaries even further of what theme park dining can be, not just from globally inspired dishes, but, plant-based options and integrating more of that technology to cater to an increasingly diverse and I think even more so health conscious audience.
Well, I think when you mention that too, you can't understate the impact of social media on the dining landscape. The fact that they have massive amounts of market research that they can access for free, and also the way that they use that to drive their own marketing of these foods, to draw people in with what, everyone wants to take a picture with a pickle milkshake. And I think that can be both good and bad. I think that can draw people in and make them want to try something that they haven't tried before when it's presented in that sort of way. But I also hope that never takes the place of them offering me things that I didn't know I wanted. Those surprises that you get there. Because I think, sometimes every now and then some of the snacks at Disney World can fall into trends. For a long time, there was a lot of cupcakes, or there was the croissant donut all over, or there's, like the 45,000 different versions of churros. And that's great. If you love, I love a good cupcake, but I also what I have always loved the most at Walt Disney World is when I try an orange blossom saffron cake. That was, and my son, little kid, he talks about what his favorite food was at Walt Disney World last year when we went, and it was an orange blossom saffron cake. And that makes his mama cry tears for how proud I am for that. That he was in an environment like that where he felt like, I'm at Disney World, this is a safe food to try. And he had a whole new experience of flavors. And to be honest, I still don't know what I ate in that thing. I don't know what all it was, but it was like a little piece of heaven. And I hope that social media and the desire to feed the beast doesn't overshadow those new and exciting experiences, which it doesn't seem like it has so far. And I hope that in that evolution of Disney dining, that those kind of things still continue, that they keep giving me those things that I've never had before.
And that's what I think the opportunity that Walt Disney World affords us as guests and as parents, right? I'm an adventurous eater. I'll try anything once and then I can decide whether or not I like it. And I've always felt that same way with my kids. And when you come to the Disney parks, you know everything is quote unquote safe, right? Nothing is going to be too crazy hot or spicy or, too wild. And it allows and has allowed my kids to become little foodies, right? They've become, their palate has been so expanded by knowing that they can try something there that's safe. Granted, it's gotten way more expensive now to take my kids because my daughter tried oysters. And now when I go to the boathouse, she's ordering a dozen oysters by herself. I'm like, what happened to the little car with the cheeseburger in it? But that's not what they look for now, right? They too, as they have continued to grow and mature, have looked to going to the festivals or going to new restaurants because they know that they can try something different, that their eyes can sort of be, open wide to something that they probably wouldn't have tried. And I'll tell her a very, very embarrassing story because I remember eating at Boma for breakfast. This is eons ago. This is a very, very long time ago. So take this in context. And it was wonderful because you're trying all these things. You can't go in Orlando, or at least you couldn't, be like, let's go out for African food tonight. Let's go try an African breakfast. So all of a sudden I'm trying these things I had never tried before. I remember coming back to the table and be like, this quinoa is awesome. Like I absolutely love it. And they're like, Mangello, it's quinoa. I'm like, no, it's not. It says quinoa on there. But I had tried something that I had never experienced before that now, we have it all the time. We have it almost everywhere. But that was for me as a semi-adult, this introduction to something I wouldn't have tried before. And I think for our kids, to your point, it allows them to do that as well. Oftentimes, especially at places like festivals, you can do a little experimenting for just a few dollars and you never know what sort of eye-opening moment you might be able to create for yourself or your kids.
Yeah, and I think, going back to the very beginning of our discussion, I think perhaps that's the greatest evolution that occurred, right? You started out with this place that was offering what I said, the elevated versions of the food that our moms or our grandmas fixed on the weekend. And as America has grown in its embrace of those, the massive melting pot of cultural heritage that we have in this country, Walt Disney World has done that too. And they've embraced all of this and they've given you experiences that you wouldn't have anywhere else.
And I think you're right. And I think what the future is going to hold, and yes, I acknowledge that it did not necessarily quote unquote work for everyone in the first generation iteration that we saw, but experiences like those aboard the Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser really sort of, I think, highlight Disney's continuingly innovative approach to dining, right? Wanting to, again, what does the future hold? I think we as guests love these very, very immersive dining experiences that blend storytelling with culinary. Like the food was as good as the environment, that was as good as the entertainment. There was this wonderful, Venn diagram of sort of all of them overlapping in something that was amazing. Now, execution with the Star Cruiser obviously did not work for everyone. I think we're going to see a modified version of that coming. But I think that part of the experience says, this is where we're looking in terms of wanting to really immerse guests even further. And I think what we've seen in terms of the trends and seeing what we termed in terms of the evolution reflects the parks, yes, it's magical, but this very sort of innovative ethos that really sort of, I think, reflects Disney's commitment to creating a rich and immersive and enjoyable dining experience that complements the storytelling on which the parks and resorts and places like Disney Springs are founded, right? The meals are no longer sustenance. They are very much a part of the story.
Yeah, I mean, in the near future, I'm very excited to see whatever it is that they decide to have on the table at the. They just released the name this week, but I can't remember the name, but the new tower at the Polynesian Island Tower. Yeah. I'm very excited to see whatever culinary treats may be in store there.
Yeah, and I think as technology continues to evolve and how, it starts to enhance what we're doing, and I think we're going to see more. My sort of long-term prediction is for more immersive and interactive and personalized experiences when we go to some of these dining locations too. So it'll be very, very interesting to see what the future holds as we sort of have, one foot in the past and our eyes focused on the future. I would love to know, and I'm sure I'm going to speak for Kendall. Kendall would too. We would love to know your thoughts on the evolution of dining in Walt Disney World. And yes, we didn't even get a chance to talk about it, but as you win some, you lose some as time goes on and new things are introduced. Unfortunately, there are some restaurants that are lost along the way. If you go back to show 370, we talk about some of the extinct restaurants in Walt Disney World and some of the loss of a few of our favorites. But I would love to know your thoughts about the evolution of the dining experience in Walt Disney World. Where do you sort of see that it's come? Where do you think it's going? What you feel has been some of the bigger wins, or maybe some of the misses, some of the swings and misses that Disney has had over the years? I'd love to literally hear you, and I'll play it on the show. So you can call the voicemail at 407-900-9391. That's 407-900-WDW1. And I will play your thoughts on the air. I'll also post this question in the clubhouse at wdwradio.com/clubhouse. You can let me know there. I'll also put it, you can pick whatever is most comfortable for you. I'll also put it in this week's newsletter, and you can comment there just by replying to me. We can have a conversation about, I'm always happy to talk about dining at Walt Disney World, especially when it's with Kendall Foreman. Kendall, I appreciate you so much. You always bring such great insights, and I love you such a deep researcher, which is awesome. So I appreciate that.
I'm going to turn the tables on you because you always have a question for everyone else. So I have one for you.
Ruh-roh.
What is your definitive core food memory, like from when you were a kid at Disney World? Like, just if you're going to think core to you, what is it?
Oh gosh, that's hard. And I'm totally on the spot. So I'm going to riff to think out loud. Because when you said core memory, it's like that scene in Ratatouille when Ego eats the ratatouille and all of a sudden he's got these visions popping up in his head and his mouth sort of drops open. Because I can remember, you're going to make me cry. I remember being with my parents as a kid and being at places like Chef Mickey's or in the Lake Buena Vista Village and eating down there and going to the luau at the Polynesian. I had no idea what a luau was. Again, sort of the first introduction. But I also have this very vivid memory of my daughter in her stroller on Main Street, USA, Mickey bar in hand. Half of a Mickey bar was all over her face. It was a beautiful picture, but, that's the whole thing, right? Food is so integral to our core memories, especially in places like this. We can remember the meals that we've shared with people over. Oh, I really am getting choked up. Remember the meals that we've shared with people over the years and some of the laughter that is, it's why the kitchen's the most important room in the house, right? So having an island or your kitchen table there, because that's where we come together and we don't just share food, but we share stories and where so many memories are created.
That's great.
We've never eaten together at a park, have we?
No.
What?
No.
Good. Kendall,
we were going to
I
try.
need a list. The next time you come here, we just need a dining day together, and I will take you anywhere and everywhere you want to go. We will bring our stretchy pants, and you pick your place.
You can just take me over to Animal Kingdom, and I'll get 25 cheese and guava cheese danishes. That is my hidden gem of a treat. You had that recent podcast, and I'm sitting there. I'm like, take me to Animal Kingdom for guava cheese danishes.
I thought she was like, I want chef's table, Victorian Alberts, let's go. I'll give you all the cheese accommodations you can handle.
I love a good sit-down meal, but I am definitely a snacker. Like, I have all of my favorite snacks all across the parks and the different resorts.
So if you could snap your fingers and have anything sort of magically teleported to your plate right now, that's what it would be?
Oh, yeah. Definitely as far as what you can still get. If it was something that I can't get anymore, which is my core food memory from Disney World, was, I mentioned the French pastries earlier, back when it was the boulangerie, but before it was when it was the small, little, narrow pastry shop, and that was my family stop. We loved that place, and we each had our thing that we got every time. And we would get it 2 or 3 times while we were there. And for me, it was a raspberry tart. And it was nothing like the tarts that you get now. It was a totally different crust, different glaze on the raspberries and everything. And I have searched the world over trying to find anything like it. And it's just ingrained in my memory. And I remember sitting with my mom and my sister and my dad by the fountain in France. And we'd eat one there. And then we'd go back in and we'd get another one. And we would take it back and put it in the little refrigerator in our room. So we could have one like later that night or the next day or something. So...
All right, so that's the question we need to ask. I mean, we can answer the other question too. We want to know, what is your core food memory at Walt Disney World? What is your sort of core memory when it comes around a snack that you loved, a memory that you shared with family, friends? I'll put that question in the clubhouse too. You can also just call the voicemail and share that, because I love that too. And as soon as we're done, I'm going to be thinking about all the things that I loved eating over the years and some of the things that we've lost along the way. Kendall Foreman, this has been awesome. You are awesome. I am absolutely famished at this point, and we really didn't even talk about individual food items. Again, I'll put links to some of the other shows that Kendall has been on in the past, and definitely check out the WDW Radio blog for her amazing content that she is so generous to share there. And we have to do this again. We have a lot of other topics I know we want to cover, so I look forward. And we need to get you out here to eat.
Definitely. I'll start working on a list
of food and topics. It's time for our Walt Disney World Trivia Question of the Week, where I invite you to test your knowledge of Walt Disney World history, or see how well you pay attention to the details in which you see, hear, remember, maybe identify a quote or sound clip from the parks. And if you get the answer right, you'll be entered to win a Disney prize package. And this week's trivia contest is once again brought to you by you. Because when you join the WDW Radio Nation, you become an important part of every episode, every live show, and the entire community and WDW Radio family. And for as little as $1 per month, not only do you help support the show, but you also unlock exclusive rewards like monthly scavenger hunts, trivia quests, group calls monthly, private community access, and monthly care packages from the parks. Plus, your contribution helps our Dream Team project, which sends children with life-threatening illnesses to Walt Disney World through Make-A-Wish. Thanks to your incredible generosity, we've raised more than $550,000 so far, and I am so grateful to you and for you for not only helping the show, but because of the real good and positive impact that, by doing so, you have on other people. I want to thank some new and longtime members of the Nation family, including Victoria Pike, Kevin P., Kim Delanis, Becky K., and Heather Lyons. I love and appreciate you, and I love being able to give back to you each and every month. If you want to find out more at how you can join the Nation family, you can visit www.radio.com/support. Now, before we get to this week's question, let's go back and review last week's and select our winner. Now, because our last question was right around Mother's Day, I wanted to honor a Disney mom. So your question was simply tell me, what is the name of the mom in Walt Disney's Carousel of Progress? First, thanks to you and so many of you who entered and got this one correct. And know that the answer is Sarah. Also known as Mom or Mother, she is one of the main characters in Walt Disney's Carousel of Progress, and she's been portrayed by a number of different voice actors and singers over the years, like Rhoda Williams, Sharon Douglas, Corinne Connolly, and B.J. Ward, who has been the voice since 1993. And in the realm of useless knowledge that I didn't need to know, but it's kind of fun and interesting anyway, did you know that the arms for the audio animatronics for Sarah, the mom, and the daughter were originally made from molds of the hands and arms of Imagineer Harriet Burns, who had to shave off all the hair off her arms so that they can do the mold. And she later complained, like, you never really know how much you miss the hair on your arms until it's completely removed. Anyway, there you go. I took all the correct entries, randomly selected one. Obviously, you didn't know that, and you didn't need to have the Harriet Burns information in there. I randomly selected one, and last week you were playing for a WDW Radio 3D keychain, the stickers, the pin, and a mystery prize. And last week's winner, randomly selected, is Chris Buchanan. So Chris, congratulations. I will get your prize package out to you right away. And of course, if you played last week and didn't win, that's okay, because here's your next chance to enter in this week's Walt Disney World Trivia Challenge. So the show this week was all about food, so obviously the trivia question has to be about food-ish as well. So your question is, what was the name of the relatively short-lived restaurant that was located inside Epcot's Wonders of Life Pavilion? You may or may not remember that there was a restaurant, there was a dining establishment located in the Wonders of Life Pavilion, not for a very long time. What was it called? Now, because I am traveling out of the country for our group London and Paris Adventures by Disney, I'm not exactly sure if I'm going to be able to get a show up in time this week. So I'm going to give you until Sunday, May 26th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern to go to WDWRadio.com, click on this week's podcast, use the form there. And again, this week you're going to play for the keychain, pin, stickers, and yet another mystery prize. So good luck and have fun. That is going to do it for this week's show. Thank you so much for taking this culinary trip through time with me and Kendall. I'd love to know again your fondest culinary core memory at Walt Disney World. Come be part of the community and conversation over in the WDW Radio Clubhouse. I'd love to hear your answer to this question. We have a lot of other conversations going on. Of course, I invite you to not only come and introduce yourself, but share anything you'd like to talk about in the Disney, Marvel, and Star Wars universe. You can also connect with me on social. I am at Lou Mangello on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, very little bit of X. I also invite you to call the voicemail at 407-900-9391. That's 407-900-WDW1 if you want to answer your question about the culinary core memory, a comment about this week's show, or just a hello from the parks, and I'll play it on the air. Don't forget to join me every Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern for WDW Radio Live, where now you can watch on YouTube or Facebook, or both, at youtube.com/WDW Radio, or over in the Clubhouse or on the WDW Radio page on Facebook. While you're on the WDW Radio site, be sure to check out the blog and subscribe to my free weekly newsletter and update, where I not only keep you up to date as to what's going on at WDW Radio and on the show and in the community in the Clubhouse, but also some additional and exclusive information to the newsletter. And when you subscribe, you automatically get a free copy of my 102 Things to Do at Walt Disney World at Least Once book. And of course, as much as I love connecting with you online, I still believe that nothing beats a handshake and a hug. So check out our events page for upcoming Meets of the Month in Walt Disney World. We're doing an on-the-road meetup in London this weekend. We have our cruise on the Disney Magic out of Fort Lauderdale to Lookout Key at Lighthouse Point this October. It's Halloween on the high seas, and our cruise on the Disney Treasure in February. But wait, there's more. Because the only thing I love more than traveling is traveling together as a community. And I have been very impatiently waiting to share with you not one, not two, but three incredible group adventures by Disney that we have planned for 2025, starting with a destination that I talked about and have hinted about for a long time. I've been very eagerly anticipating, and I'm finally so happy to be able to share that our much anticipated journey back to Japan is going to take place from May 18th through the 25th, 2025, and is going to immerse us in the incredibly rich history and the vibrant culture and the breathtaking landscapes and food of Japan. We're going to go to ancient temples and see city life in Tokyo and the serene gardens, all in the company of your WDW Radio friends and family. There are just a couple of spots available. I believe we only have 4 spots available. This trip is expected to book up, so if you want to find out more, you can visit www.radio.com/Japan25. And if you thought Japan was all we had planned for next year, hold on to your kimonos, because we've added not 1, but 2 more incredible trips. And I've got good news, and I've got some not so great news, because our first trip next year is going to take us back to where the magic began, to Disneyland in Southern California, with stops at the Walt Disney Studios, Archives, behind the scenes at Imagineering, which is incredible, the Jim Henson Company, which is one of my favorite parts of this trip, Walt Disney's apartment in Disneyland, Disney California Adventure, and a lot of other special surprises. Now, this trip takes place from July 27th through August 1st, and much to my surprise, sold out very, very quickly. So, two things. We are taking a waiting list for the July 27th trip, but we had such an incredible response that I've added another date. From July 6th through the 11th, 2025, we are going to do a second Adventures by Disney to Disneyland and Hollywood. And so if you want to join us and walk in Walt's footsteps and uncover the history of the man and the company on this unforgettable adventure, you can go to wdwradio.com/DL25 and either add your name to the waiting list for the July 27th trip or get one of the few, I think there's 3 spots left for the July 6th adventure. But wait, there's more. We are not done yet. Last year, I was introduced to a new type of vacation that I immediately fell in love with and already started to think about how we could plan another. So I'm so excited to announce we're going back on our next river cruise. And I want to invite you to set sail with us from September 18th through the 25th, 2025, as we discover the beauty and the history and the cuisine in France, the only way Adventures by Disney and AMA Waterways can do it, because this river cruise journey is going to take us through Paris, the heart of Normandy, and so many wonderful little quaint towns peppered along the Seine. And if whether you've gone on an ocean liner or Disney Cruise Line before, a river cruise is very different. A cruise along the Seine is unique and really an enchanting way to experience France, because unlike larger cruise ships that travel the ocean, the river cruise is a much more intimate boutique experience that literally and figuratively brings you closer to the heart and the soul of the regions we're going to visit. The ships are much, much smaller. There's maybe about 140 or so guests total. And if you're interested or intrigued, I invite you to go back and listen to show 765, which is our Nat Geo Danube River Cruise through the Christmas markets recap and review. Give you a much more broader and detailed look at what cruising is like on the river, and more importantly, what cruising is like together as a group. To learn more about the adventure, the itinerary, and AMA Waterways and the AMA Lyra ship and get an idea of what it looks and feels like, you can go to wdwradio.com/Seine25, SEINE. There and on all of the pages, we have not just detailed itineraries, but photos, additional information, and FAQs, as well as a no obligation interest form that you can fill out for additional information. Now, I do want to say that spaces are limited and are booked on a first come, first served basis exclusively through our friends over at Mouse Fan Travel and by using the forms on each of those pages. So I strongly suggest, as you see with the Disneyland adventure, if you are thinking about joining us, that you act fast and take a look. If you have any questions, you can email me or reach out to your Mouse Fan Travel advisor. Each of these adventures is adults only, so all guests must be ages 18 years of age or older. And the reason why we do that is because other than the Seine River Cruise, we buy out and book the other adventures exclusively for our WDW Radio family. And by making it 18 years of age and older, we're able to add a few other special extra touches that maybe you can't get on other adventures, and a few surprises that we have in store as well. And if you have any questions or need any further information, you can reach out to me, Lou, at WDWRadio.com, your Mouse Fan Travel advisor, who is always ready to assist. And I sincerely hope that you'll join me and Becky from Mouse Fan Travel and our WDW Radio family for these incredible vacation opportunities. It is more than just about the travel and destinations. It really is about making these memories that will last a lifetime with friends that you may have or may have not have met yet, including me, who are going to share your passion and enthusiasm for Disney, travel, adventure, and of course, food. So again, to find out more about any or all these adventures, just go to www.radio.com, click on the blog, and you'll find individual posts about each of these adventures. And whether you're joining us on one of these adventures or you're looking to book your own adventure anywhere in this world, not just into a Disney park, resort, or cruise line, go and visit our friends over at mousefantravel.com for fee-free and, more importantly, incredibly personal attention to you and your vacation plans. And finally, speaking of travel and adventure, we are going on our WDW Radio Adventures by Disney to London and Paris starting this week. Please follow along both in the clubhouse, and I'll primarily be posting over on Instagram at instagram.com/LouMongello, both on my stories and reels as well as posts. I will also likely go live if and when I can. So again, whether you turn on notifications on Facebook or YouTube, or ideally both, so you be sure you get notified, you can join along on the fun in real time while we are visiting London and Paris. Also, please visit LouMongello.com, see how we can work together. Whether you're looking for a keynote speaker for your event, conference, or for your business, I share lessons from the Disney parks and Walt on customer service and leadership and experiences. And if you're a creator or an entrepreneur or a solopreneur looking to take your business, brand, or idea to the next level, you can find out some of the different ways we can work together. I can help you, as well as my Momentum series of events, including my weekend workshop in Walt Disney World this September, and find out how to take advantage of our super duper early bird discount pricing. Again, you can find everything at LouMongello.com. So that's it for this week's show. Thank you again so very much. I love and appreciate you. I hope that you continue to always choose the good and let that be the magic that continues to guide you forward. I hope that this truly is your best week ever. I love and appreciate you so, so very much. Thank you for your friendship and support. You might not realize it, but you make a lot of magic for me just by being here. So until next time, see ya.
Hey Lou, it's Patrice Roberti from Metro Boston. I don't know if you're still doing the historical ones, but of course I spend a lot of my time listening to historical ones to get caught up, and so many are so interesting. And last night I was listening to show 263, 10 top 10 attraction vehicles in Walt Disney World. And it was amazing. You transformed in that one before my very ears, from hugs and handshakes and loves to snack Lou to the Qui-Gon Jinn, the Jedi Master. You transformed before my ears to a Jedi Master of Trivia with Tim there as your earnest Padawan, listening to your great wisdom. The way you were talking about the trivia with such knowledge, and knowledge that you had knowledge, was just great, and I enjoyed it a lot. And I'm listening to that one again. And another one that I heard was number 385, 10 Reasons Why Every WDW fan and family needs to visit Disneyland. Obviously, you'll remember that was with your family. It's about 10-ish years ago, and it was totally great. It was excellent listening, and just hearing your family talk about stuff was just very enjoyable. So I very much hope that you might play those two if you do historical things again, and I hope you have a nice trip to London. I think you're going there shortly. Maybe you're there now. Take care. Bye.